What does it say about a country's law enforcement system when the very officers sworn to protect the public are accused of selling justice for just 1,000 rand? That is the disturbing question South Africans are asking tonight after 3 police officers from Vereeniging were arrested for allegedly taking a bribe to release an undocumented immigrant from custody. Not drug traffickers. Not armed robbers. Police officers. And the amount? Just our 1,000. That means, according to the allegations, the badge, the law, public trust, and national security were all put up for sale for less than what many South Africans spend on groceries in a week. This is not just another corruption case. Because when corruption reaches the officers on the street, when frontline policing can allegedly be bought so cheaply, then the public is left wondering whether the law still protects ordinary people, or only those who can pay. And what makes this even more alarming is that this happened during Operation Shanela, the very operation meant to restore law and order, crack down on undocumented migration, and rebuild public confidence in the police. Instead, the operation meant to clean up the streets has now exposed alleged corruption inside the cleanup itself. Before we go further, if you believe stories like this must be exposed and those in power must be held accountable, like this video and subscribe now because the truth behind these cases matters more than ever. The 3 officers at the center of this scandal are Sergeant Munyane Boysen Labiko, Constable Marina Malasinia, and Reservist Sergeant Peter Easyboy Makama Kumalo. According to reports, the officers were arrested in Evaton during Operation Shanela II after allegedly accepting R1,000 in exchange for releasing an undocumented foreign national who had been lawfully detained. Let that sink in. The suspect had already been apprehended. The law was already in motion. The officers did not need to chase anyone or investigate anything further. Their only responsibility was to follow the process. But according to the allegations, they instead accepted cash and allowed the detainee to walk free. That means the arrest meant nothing, the operation meant nothing, and the rule of law meant nothing. This happened in Vereeniging, in Gauteng, an area where concerns around illegal immigration, policing failures, and public frustration have already been running high. That is why this story matters so much right now. Because it strikes directly at one of the most sensitive issues in South Africa today, public trust in law enforcement during a time of rising anger over crime and undocumented migration. For many South Africans, the fear is not only that illegal immigrants are entering communities undetected, but that corruption within law enforcement may be helping them stay. And if that fear is true, then this is far bigger than 3 officers. This becomes a symptom of a much deeper institutional crisis. Operation Shanela itself was designed as a high-visibility law enforcement campaign. Its purpose is to flood high-crime areas with police, target wanted suspects, reduce violent crime, and strengthen cooperation between SAPS, traffic officials, and home affairs. The operation is supposed to reassure the public that the state is taking crime seriously. On paper, that sounds promising. But here's where things get disturbing. If officers participating in such an operation are themselves accused of corruption, then the public is forced to ask a devastating question. Who is policing the police? Because the damage here is not limited to one undocumented immigrant being released. The damage is to the credibility of the operation itself. Imagine residents watching police roadblocks, arrests, and patrols, believing justice is being enforced, while some officers may allegedly be turning arrests into personal profit opportunities. That destroys confidence. And without public confidence, policing becomes weaker. To understand how serious this is, look at what reportedly happened step by step. During Operation Shanela II in Evaton, law enforcement teams involving SAPS, traffic authorities, home affairs officials, and other stakeholders were conducting coordinated operations targeting criminal suspects and undocumented individuals. In the process, an undocumented foreign national was detained. That detention should have led to normal legal procedures, processing, investigation, and likely immigration enforcement. Instead, the allegation is that these 3 officers accepted a payment of R1,000 to release the detainee. Somehow, this alleged bribery was detected. Authorities moved in and arrested the officers. The same operation that was targeting crime ended up catching officers within its own ranks. That alone is remarkable. In one operation, a total of 79 suspects were reportedly arrested. Yet the most shocking arrests were not civilians, but police officers. The officers then appeared in court on Friday and were granted bail. And while the investigation continues, no full public explanation has yet been given regarding how the bribery was uncovered, who reported it, how the money changed hands, or whether similar incidents may have happened before. And that is where the unanswered questions begin, because bribery cases like this rarely happen in isolation. If the allegations are true, was this the first time? Was this a spontaneous decision made in the moment? Or was it part of a routine pattern that only now got exposed? This is the part few people are talking about. Corruption at street level often survives because it becomes normalized. Small bribes, quiet releases, no paperwork, no questions. The amounts may look small, but the system-wide damage is enormous. 1,000 rand here, a release there, and soon criminal enforcement becomes negotiable. And if one undocumented detainee can allegedly buy freedom, what about suspects with more money? What about syndicates? What about repeat offenders? That is the nightmare scenario, because petty corruption creates openings for major criminal networks. A small bribe today can enable organized crime tomorrow. This is why anti-corruption experts often warn that low-level corruption is never really low-level. It corrodes the state from the bottom up. And what happened next raised serious questions. The officers were granted bail quickly after appearing in court. Legally, bail is a normal right, and being granted bail does not mean innocence. But in the court of public opinion, many people see officers accused of corruption walking free almost immediately and feel the system is soft on internal misconduct. For ordinary citizens, especially those who have suffered from crime, this creates anger. Because many people feel that when citizens break the law, consequences are immediate. But when officials are accused of breaking the law, procedures become slower, softer, and less visible. That perception, whether fair or not, deepens public mistrust. And that mistrust is already widespread. South Africa has faced repeated allegations of corruption within law enforcement over the years. There have been accusations involving bribery, protection rackets, missing dockets, and officers working with criminal syndicates. Every new case adds to a growing public belief that corruption is not an exception, but part of the machinery. That may not be fair to honest officers. And it is important to say that many police officers risk their lives and serve with integrity. But every corruption scandal makes their job harder. Because when the public loses trust, cooperation drops. Witnesses become reluctant. Victims become cynical. Communities stop believing that reporting crime will lead to justice. That weakens the entire criminal justice system. But the political and social consequences go even further. Illegal immigration is already a deeply emotional and politically charged issue in South Africa. Communities facing unemployment, crime, and limited public resources often feel that the state has lost control of the borders. Whether all those frustrations are justified or not, the perception is real. So when officers are accused of taking money to release undocumented migrants, it reinforces the belief that corruption is undermining immigration enforcement. That fuels anger. And anger around immigration can quickly spill into social instability, community tensions, and even violence. That is why this case is dangerous beyond the courtroom. Because it feeds into existing frustrations around jobs, policing, and state failure. Economically, the consequences are also serious. Corruption increases the cost of governance. Operations become less effective. Resources are wasted. Enforcement outcomes become unreliable. And taxpayers lose faith that public funds are producing real security. Operation Shanela requires manpower, logistics, fuel, coordination, and administrative resources. If officers involved in such operations are compromised, then the public starts to question whether these expensive efforts are actually delivering results. And once that confidence drops, institutional legitimacy drops with it. Then there is the media response. Social media erupted almost immediately after news of the arrests emerged. Many users expressed outrage, arguing that the officers had betrayed the public for an embarrassingly small amount of money. Others pointed to the case as proof that corruption within policing is far more common than authorities admit. Some blamed weak accountability. Some blamed economic desperation. Others blamed a culture of impunity. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing: the allegations are deeply damaging. Because when corruption is this direct, this visible, and this simple, it is impossible to dismiss. There are, of course, voices urging caution. The officers have been charged, but they have not been convicted. They remain accused persons under the law. And that legal principle matters. But here is the challenge. Even before conviction, the reputational damage is already done. The public does not wait for court verdicts to form opinions. The image of officers allegedly accepting money to release a detainee is already enough to shape public perception. That perception will not be repaired by silence. And this is where leadership matters. SAPS cannot afford vague statements and quiet proceedings. Public trust demands transparency. People want to know how this happened, how it was detected, whether more officers are being investigated, and what safeguards exist to prevent it happening again. Because if authorities treat this as just 3 bad apples, they may miss the deeper issue. Systems do not fail because one person acts badly. Systems fail when bad conduct becomes possible, profitable, and repeatable. So what happens next? The criminal case will proceed through the courts. Investigators will need to establish the evidence surrounding the alleged payment, the officers' roles, and the circumstances of the release. If convicted, the officers could face criminal penalties and disciplinary action. Internal SAPS processes may also determine whether additional officials were involved or whether internal controls failed. But the bigger question is whether this case leads to reform. Will there be stronger oversight during operations? Will there be tougher anti-corruption monitoring? Will there be public accountability? Or will this become another scandal that generates outrage for a week and disappears without structural change? Because that is what many South Africans fear most. Not just corruption, but repetitive corruption without consequence. And if that happens, public cynicism will grow even deeper. In the end, this story is not about our 1000. It is about the price of public trust. It is about the value of a badge. It is about whether the institutions meant to enforce the law are themselves vulnerable to corruption. Because if justice can allegedly be sold so cheaply, then citizens are left asking a terrifying question. How much does the law really cost? And until that question is answered, every anti-crime operation, every arrest, and every official promise will be shadowed by doubt. 3 officers have been arrested, but the real issue on trial is trust in the system itself. And if that trust continues to collapse, the consequences will reach far beyond one courtroom in Vereeniging. Because when people stop believing the law is fair, society enters dangerous territory. That is why this case matters. That is why people are angry. And that is why what happens next may determine whether this becomes a turning point or just another warning ignored. What do you think? Are these arrests proof that the system is working because corrupt officers were caught, or proof that corruption inside law enforcement is deeper than many people realize? Comment below, because the answer says everything about where the country is heading next.